Um, some of you were here more than 2 years ago when we had our first meeting, and we started in a dark time in a state of grief. Really, so much had been lost. We were all uh, locked down in our houses. Couldn't even see our kids. It was months before I saw any of my kids. That you remember that, and that's where we started. We started in grief, and the problem with our culture, especially our Western culture, is we don't teach anybody what to do with it. We really don't. We don't teach anybody what to do with grief. Unfortunate, because it's probably the most common inner kind of emotional, psychological, spiritual state of all. Who doesn't lose things? Okay. And so we all came together with that. And I started out teaching the formal practice. I remember the first session, I think, or the second session, teaching Tonglen, a special Tibetan super practice for dealing with some extreme grief. But that's just only one practice. The fact that we have nothing in our toolkit, usually in our culture, for grief, when it hits us, is a shame. So today is a little bit more on grief and how you can, the best word I can use for it is how you can metabolize it. When we eat food, we get the nourishment and the energy from the food only if we can metabolize it. And there's probably are illnesses for people with names that say when they have a hard time metabolizing food for one reason or another. But grief it's a given. There's nobody, and I don't care what your economic status, how rich you are, or how poor you are, we lose things, and grief hits us. Richard Rohr has a really fine book that's called Order, Disorder, Reorder. He's talking about it just some kind of internal flow from order to disorder to reorder. I would add a step in there. I think it's based on my Buddhist background, but also on my work with Aramaic. So I'd say order, everything just sort of is working well and you're fine and everything's working. And then disorder, something happens, you wake up and your wife is dead next to you in the bed. I can't think of probably any deeper kind of disorder. So order, disorder, and then I would say emptiness, and then reorder. So that's like a 4-step thing, and I think I think adding emptiness that gives a space for grief. That's what grief is. I remember when my mother died. It was a 2-week intense, the most intense grief I've ever felt. Just knocked me off my game totally, and it was about emptiness. And I'll never forget it. I wrote a poem about it, which most people can't relate to because it was so profound for me. I mean, I didn't write, I didn't sit. Laying on the floor in my study, I was just wiped out. Didn't even called in sick. And I taught for years whatever. Now, I taught sick, in a way. It was stupid, but that's the kind of guy I am as a one. But then this was beyond that. So this emptiness that comes when you lose something and how to navigate that. And I've learned some things over the years. I want to sort of share them with you. If you have my previous book, by the way, if you're listening, if you want the current book of poems, The Cave of the Heart, I've sent out some. People have requested them. I'm glad to send them out. But just send me, if you haven't gotten one, just send me an email or text or something. Just say I'd like the Cave of the Heart, and make sure you give me your postal address, and then I'll send you one. But in the previous book, become invisible, I had a poem called Shoe Leather Therapy. And it was about 2 years after my marriage fell apart. That's big emptiness. And how I walked this road out here, this little 2 kilometer Camino down to the end of the road, dead end, and then back. There's something symbolic about hitting the dead end, when you take a walk. And at the end of the dead end is an abandoned white cottage and a dead tree in the front yard. If you didn't get the picture of the dead end, you got to hit that sometimes. And so I walked that pretty religiously for every day for about 2 years. It took about 2 years to metabolize all the pain and emptiness, all the hurt, all the regret, all that stuff. But it was helpful. Of course, I was sitting every morning. I was writing, but this idea that walking can be help, I think is really good to get out. There's something about getting out under the vastness where I love this house. It's really kind of spacious. I'm in the Zendo here at the retreat house, but still, when you're in a house, you're sort of in your head, and you can't. Here's one thing that I think is key: you can't grieve this. Actually, the you, I mean, is that you that lives in the head. It cannot be done mentally. It's a physical thing. You have to go through the body, and it does feel physical when you're really in grief. You cry, and you just hurt. But you have to be able to put the issue in the heart, in the cave of the heart, as I call it, and just leave it there and revisit it every day. And you'll be different on the other end. It's over, if it's ever over, when you feel a sense of peace. That sort of gives you a sense of it. You find something different that you didn't have before the loss. You're richer in a way for the whole journey. So I went out the other day. It was actually the last Monday, and I was in a very hard place because I just had lost this wonderful woman at 61. She just went to sleep in a hotel room, and who knows, what she wakes up to. And but that was just also that was the night of the day. It was Roe was reversed, and then 50 years of healthcare on a level that was still inadequate, but at least it was there, is gone now, potentially gone now. And then other things happening, just the stuff that happens in your normal life. So I was in sort of a, watching the January 6th committee things. It's remarkably interesting, but you see how this system of government we have is dangling by a thread. That shakes you up. A lot has been lost. Will it be recovered? Order, disorder. You can certainly relate to that. Emptiness, reorder. Yeah. So all that led me to just, I sat, but I didn't write. I figured I'd write after, and then I just wanted to get outside. So that's where this poem comes from. And hopefully, it's always my hope there's something we can learn from it. I'm looking for it because I don't have it memorized quite yet. Okay. What you were listening to on the way in, by the way, was Albinoni's Adagio in G minor, 3 different takes on that. And actually, when I came back from the grief walk was so powerful in a way that I just came right in and got on the computer and put on the Albinoni and started typing. So here's what came out. Several versions of Albinoni's Adagio in G minor play in continuous loop. as I sit down to transcribe the notes I scribbled on my walk this morning. So much loss, so much loss. The voice keeps on keening as I lace up my boots, grab my hat and walking stick, and head out the door. So much loss, the voice kept keening. As I laced up my boots, grabbed my hat and walking stick, headed out the door. Rule of law hanging by a thread. So many precious human beings slaughtered in the killing fields of Ukraine and in the supermarkets, schools, and streets of America. Other mothers, sisters, and daughters jerked back into second-class citizenship on an ordinary Friday morning. And that night, a dear friend dies in her sleep. You didn't want to go to bed because if you went to sleep, you'd wake up with the first full day of not having her in your world. The only way I know how to metabolize such bittersweet heartache is to walk down our gravel drive and out to the fallow field under the vast blue sky. The former empire of wild mustard that reigned in early summer is gone. Clumps of tiny white asters and the imperious Queen Anne's lace rule the day. The charm of goldfinches feast on what seed is left in the tall, burnt-out thistle, as a red-winged blackbird surveys the scene like a Zen mountain hermit on her telephone wire and offers her shrill lament. Gone, gone, gone. And then she flies off, flashing the broken heart on her sleeve for all to see. As I walk on near the end of the field, I see an absolutely new plant. It blows my mind as I've been walking this road for 40 years now. I stop and jot notes, straight, like a surveyor's stake, spine prickly, long, radial, sawtoothed leaves, 24 cone-shaped, spiky green flowers turning purple. I look closer and I see there's a bee or two feeding on every flower. And I turn and walk back home. And there's still a deep ache in my heart. And like this new plant, I won't give this ache a name. No, I'll just keep walking and keep paying visits every day and see what it's meant to become. Here is the world. Beautiful and terrible things will happen. Don't be afraid. Here is the world. Beautiful and terrible things will happen. Don't be afraid. That line was put in the picture that we had in the screensaver, an artist named Lisa Ritchie from North Carolina. She made that for me. And if anything else, here is the world. Beautiful, terrible. Those things will happen. Don't be afraid. Just a couple of maybe, and this will be out tomorrow if you wanted to take another look. I just called it field notes. Don't be afraid. That's what I call the poems that come out of walking out to the fallow field. One interesting thing here is just the image of the fallow field itself. That field used to be rotated pretty religiously between corn and soybean, and then corn and soybean, and corn and soybean. And for the last couple of years, they haven't planted in it, so it's gone what they call fallow. They're not working the field, and it's so much more interesting to walk by. And because you see the wildness that's there, that they're always tilling up and then planting the corn. It's really not that interesting to walk by a field of corn or soybean. I like the soybean better than corn, actually. But this is immensely interesting. And there's something about the image of the fallow field and that emptiness that goes between order and reorder. You can't work grief. You can't work to grieve. You have to, in a sense, go fallow. And there's another kind of wild stuff that grow up. The wild mustard, the thistle, and then even a new plant, which is, I think, the most hopeful image of, David White has a poem about the well of grief. And most people, he says, those who will not slip beneath the still surface on the well of grief. Well, there's a lot of those people. I mean, there was so much ungrieved in my early childhood just because I didn't know, and it seemed like scary and it would hurt, and I just wanted to get out of it, which is a normal way we approach, painful things. Let me get out of it. Let me go around it. Let me distract myself from it, whatever. Doesn't work. I spent decades doing that. I mean, I even lost a marriage once and didn't really fully grieve it. And guess what? You lose a marriage again until you can maybe grieve the whole thing, which I hope I've done. So this fallow field is a good image of what of the heart, because the spiritual heart, the sacred heart, the bodhicitta, as the Buddhists call it, there's no way to work it. It's not utilitarian, but it is there for just this. I talk about, I tell people, I said, you can't grieve because you is the ego, and the ego is trying to fix everything, duct tape it together. No, you just take your grief, and in a ceremony of your own, take it down through the body and go into the cave of the heart, put it on an altar of the heart, and just, that says it's holy, and I'm going to come and visit and just be in the presence of you. And just that visiting, that just not trying to get rid of it, is the doorway to metabolizing it. And it's like this new plant. It's an amazing plant. Actually, I have already named it. What I was able to refuse was taking my camera out and identifying it. I call it a monk plant. It looks like a monk. Actually, it looks like monks in choir, the little things up there. But you just don't want to even try to identify it. You just visit it and you sit in its presence, and it works on you, and vice versa. And then at the end, there's all I can say is there's a absolutely new plant, something that wasn't in your life. And you need to hear this at the outset, because you need some motivation to go into it. You need to know people do go into it. And when they come out the other side, having metabolized it, you've got something you didn't have before. Even though you lost something comes back. In the well of grief with David White, you find these small round coins at the bottom of the well. There is something. There is a bottom to it. So whatever you're grieving now, and I bet if you look closely, there's probably more than one thing that you've lost and you haven't really taken the time to grieve. And so when we sit in formal meditation, when we're still and physically pretty still, we're sitting, and then it gets silent. When you Just go to that place, that is the what I call the cave of the heart. And you don't have to do it mentally. It just happens, putting yourself in that state. And especially when you know the loss is really painful and really current, just sitting with it in the presence of it, presence of something that's sacred. Like if you lose a really great friend, that grief is sacred. You lose a country. Think of Ukrainians. Think of us. The ability to lose a country, lose a way of life, lose healthcare. Yeah. So we got a lot to sit with. So enough on that. Let's switch to like meditation mode.